Oh, well, hey there, and welcome back to Pixorama, where today we're gonna follow the old dusty trail into the desert. You hear that? That right there is the sound of a fake coyote. But it's odd how that sound triggers feelings of serenity, tranquility, and vast open spaces. It's wild and dangerous, yet calm and beautiful. Which is why today I thought we would try and tackle a desert platformer tile set. So, follow along with me if you're so inclined, and let's see what we can rustle up. Great green steam train to Gumpletown! That's right, those of you wondrous little wonder bunnies out there who pride yourselves on your observational skills may have noticed that I have finally taken the plunge into a new app for pixeling, A-Sprite. Yes, I'm excited about it too. Anyway, this is the program we will be using for today's little creation. So join me as we open a blank document and set our tile to 128 by 128 pixels. After this, we are going to load a color palette in, and I just happen to have one prepared here, which I will put in the description below so you can use it as well. Now once you load the colors in, they all look a bit of a mishmash, so it is kind of nice to organize them properly. As you can see here, they're just sort of scattered about in no particular order. I'm going to get rid of some of the empty colors here that we're not using, and then under this little arrow icon up the top here, we can actually choose to sort our palette in a number of different ways. I'm going to sort it by hue, and you can see here that already it's looking nicer. If I collapse this box, it might get even clearer, because now they're organized into groups of kind of 4 or 8. And now that we can actually see what colors we're using, I'm just going to slap a color onto the background here, rename this layer BG, and then create a new layer. And this is going to be where our tile map is situated. So I'm going to call it Level Tile Main, and that will suffice. And now, behold, as we follow in the footsteps of the great Lego civilization of old, and block out our ground plane here. And what I'm going to do is draw out 3 different layers, because the idea here is to, well, envisage a cross-section of the Earth that we're looking at. So it's kind of like cutting a cake. We've cut down vertically through the Earth, we're looking at it from the side, and the top layer that we're seeing is going to be the surface level sand and rocks, under which lie the other strata, as it were, which will get darker as we get deeper. I hope that makes sense. In any case, the first thing you're going to notice as we watch this getting created before your very eyes is that I actually have a bit of trouble visualizing how it's actually supposed to look, so things are a little bit of a mess for a little bit here, until I discover that what I really should be doing is drawing the outlines of the rocks first of all, and then filling in their details afterwards. But perhaps another example would be useful here, so let us step back and whiz away for a moment so I can demonstrate. Hello? I said whiz away. Where the devil is my transition? Oh, yes, there we are. Now, for those of you who missed my deliciously antiquated but rather thorough rock drawing tutorial, don't worry, because I'm about to do it again here and much faster. So the first thing to do is choose 2 colors to represent your rock, after which you can go and start tracing the outline of your rock. And we'll keep it very simple this time. Let's just make it a rectanguloid shape here. And I'm going to do this in the highlight color first. You can choose either, but I find it sort of easier to do it this way. And once you've got your light color down, then all you need to do is start tracing the shadows. And you'll notice immediately that we start seeing some depth, especially when you fill that area in. Now we can choose a tertiary color, and this is going to be useful for drawing the underside shadow of the rock, as well as cracks, niches, and little bumps. So I'm just going to start detailing here, and let's speed things up for convenience sake. You'll probably pretty quickly want to choose a quaternary shade to fill in the deep, dark cracks of your little microlith. These kind of details really just help kind of sell your object visually. And some of you may notice that this is not strictly analogous to what we're trying to do with the tile map, but I wanted to illustrate the point that when drawing these kind of objects, rocks in particular, it's best to start by drawing the outside of the shape, drawing the outline of it, and then filling in the details afterwards. And in fact, doing this as a little exercise beforehand might actually be quite helpful, because as I said, the method can then be translated directly to the tile map we're doing. From here on out, you can start adding other little details like bumps and divots on the top of the rock. Just be mindful, as ever, to keep in mind where your light source is coming from. In this case, it is coming from above. And I think that pretty much wraps up this little example. So, back to the main stuff! There. Now you can appreciate how messy this is all looking and how unsatisfied I was at the time. But you'll notice right about now that I switch gears and start employing a bit of the method we just discussed. But I'm doing it in kind of an inverse way. As you can see, I already have the background color. So what I'm doing is trying to envisage the shadows of potential rocks, and I'm drawing the shadows out first, and that is forming the shapes that I will then work with, if that makes sense. So you can see that I've got some little blobs here that are going to become rocks. But all this talk of blobs and rocks is reminding me I need another coffee. Give me 1 second, I'll be right back. Coffee truly is the liquid of the gods. In any case, let us continue our rock building journey. You can see that this rock outline technique is now kind of paying off, and the colors I'm using are slowly transitioning into darker and darker shades as we descend underground. The idea obviously was to have the top layer the brightest as it's in the sun, and then gradually have the rocks get darker and darker until they fade away. It doesn't actually make logical sense if you think about a cross-section of Earth. It most likely would not look like this. There would be layers of lighter and darker material. But honestly, there were a couple of reasons why I did this. One, of course, was stylistic.
Ah, so the boy thinks he has style, does he? Well, he hasn't laid eyes on old Joe Styleman. Look at my stylish jumper, and my stylish seat in my super stylish home. Look at my stylish cat. The cat is stylish. Okay, that's enough.
Yes, so that's the first reason. And secondly, I did it because I typically like in platforming games to draw the player's attention to the center of the screen, as that's where most things happen, and I wanted the tile set to kind of fade away underneath. So I'm trying to keep things lightest and brightest in the middle. Now, one very important aspect of all this that I've neglected to mention until now is the tiling aspect of the tile set here. How, in Gazmacon's Pit of Penance, am I going to get things to line up when I can't see what's off the edges of the screen here and I can't see how the tile set connects to itself? Well, there's a little trick which I can share with you now, which is quite simple and anyone could have come up with really. But basically, every now and then I simply draw a line across the whole canvas, holding shift to make sure it's straight, and that's how I can see where things will line up. Of course, you still won't be able to see exactly what's going on until you tile this thing out, but it's good enough for now. At this point, I've started adding some highlight details, in particular to the rocks in the middle row. I'm just really trying to get them to pop and to make them look like they're standing out, that they're a bit 3D, so some of the edges are going to catch some light, and that is represented by these little light pixels that I've just sort of dotted about. I'm also doing a lot of shadow detailing, and I've drawn some really deep, dark crevices. You can see them in these dark clusters of pixels, just to really, again, give some sense of depth and make things sort of pop. And I'm just going to carry on like this, using lighter colors to detail the rocks where I believe that the light should be falling on them in this non-physics-based scenario, and adding some of these little highlight pixels along the edges just to give them, again, a little more character, a little more interest. And it looks like the scene is starting to shape up pretty well, actually. So I believe it's time to test out this tile map and see if it actually, well, tiles. Yippee, what fun! So I'm just going to select the entire document and copy it. I'm going to create a new document here that is wide enough to accommodate the test that we want to do. So 512 pixels is 4 times 128. And I'm just going to copy and paste a couple of these chunks side by side to see if they actually line up. And it looks like they link up quite nicely, no doubt thanks to our wondrous line drawing trick. Except that I can see a couple of problem areas which I'll have to fix. These rocks on the edges of the tile, for example, which I probably missed because they were on the edges of the tile. So I will give them a little bit of love, bring them up to speed, and that basically wraps it up for the main platform of this tile map, which is quite exciting indeed. Although, having said that, there is one other quite important part of this which we will get to a little bit later. For now, it's time for a small diversion as we do something which I like to call set dressing. And I would like to start by drawing a whole heap of little plants which we could use in our potential platforming game. Something that suits the environment, perhaps some cacti. So I'm going to start with a little round cactus here, which I believe is called Godmother's Cushion or something awful like that.
Research time!
It's time to see what this desert-loving succulent is really called. And it seems like while it's nicknamed Mother-in-Law's Cushion, it's actually called a golden barrel cactus. Yes, so we'll draw our little golden barrel cactus here, and then, of course, what desert would be complete without a saguaro cactus? Or cacti, as it were. So I'll draw a couple of these lonely sentinels as well. I'm going to start with a big one here, and I'm just going to really rough these out pretty quickly. Just going to keep the shapes pretty basic and draw a couple of spines on the outside. I'm also going to throw a nice shade of blue into the shadows, just to give it something interesting. I'll do a smaller saguaro cactus as well, and again, just top it off with a couple little doink spikes, and give it some grass around the base to make it blend in a little more. But this is really just, extra bedazzle for the scene. Oh, and one last thing. Just to add a little more color and interest, a nice little desert rose, or something kind of resembling a desert rose, which just came from my imagination, because they don't really look like this, but perhaps this is some other type of cactus that I've seen at some point. In any case, it's going to get some nice pink flowers, and then I'm going to top it all off with some nice highlighting here in a nice little shade of yellow. And I'm finding that these flowers look so particularly beautiful that I'm going to add one more plant. It's going to be another succulent. I have no idea what this thing is called. If you are a botanical expert, perhaps you can let me know in the comments. But I'm just feeling that this scene could use as much color as possible. So yeah, really giving it some pops with these red flowers here. I'm going to add a couple of these little flowers to the other succulents, the saguaros for example, because I have seen cacti bloom in the desert. And after some final detailing, I think that'll just about do it for the plants here. Ah, but what about the background? Well, I thought I'd keep it pretty simple here and just do some big, stately dunes looming over the whole scene. These are really simple to do. I'm just going to blob out a bunch of orange and then pretty much coat them in a lighter shade where I think the sun should be hitting them and fill in some of the shadow details here. And of course, the sky needs some interest too, so I'm just going to draw out some funny looking little clouds here. I'm going to add another shade to the sky, again, just really trying to focus the attention on the center of the scene by making sure that everything in the center is the lightest and brightest part. Let's quickly refine the shadowing and details on these dunes in the background, just giving them a little more interest again with some streaky details and blending these shadows a little bit. And then, just because I was feeling a little macabre, I thought I would add one more tiny little element to the scenery here, and that is a couple of unfortunate creatures who met their demise under the baking sun. So I'm going to draw a couple of skulls here, perhaps a bird one, perhaps a human one. And they look kind of cute, they're sort of blending in nicely, and they're not too obvious, so I like that. And now, let's return to that little thing I mentioned earlier. This tile set probably needs a gap where players can fall to their deaths horrifically, so I'm going to create a new layer here called Level Tile Edges. And for this, I'm just going to duplicate our main platform, and then basically just start carving down through it to create this hole that we want in our terrain. Let me just hide these other layers so we can see what we're doing. And as you can see, I'm just going to basically carve downwards following roughly the contour of the rocks that already exist. This will give us a little head start in the part that's to come. So basically, once you've drawn those initial lines, you can start thickening them, and we're basically going to carve out the entire center of this tile. What this effectively does is leave us with two halves, which in the future we can then use to tack onto the existing platform to create a gap of whatever width you desire. This is a very economical way of adding to your tile set without having to draw a whole new asset. All we really have to do from here on out is just refine the edges and make sure they're looking nice and fancy. Simply use your intuition, bump a few rocks out, pull a few back, until you're satisfied with the result. And what will the player see behind this little gap? Well, that's up to you, but in this case, what I'm going to do is the lazy approach. I'm just going to flip to our background layer where the sand dunes are, add a few bands of color that descend into darkness like the rest of the set, and I'm not really going to worry about that too much because we're not really focusing on that in this tutorial. But that will pretty much finish up this little tile set, and I certainly hope it's turned out well. Let's have a little gander and find out. There we have it. A colourful little desert scene with slightly macabre undertones and enough gaps for anyone to fall to their death nicely in. Even with the few pieces we've created, there are actually quite a lot of possibilities open to us. So have a play and see what you can come up with. Well, that'll just about do it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. There is something so tranquil about desert scenes. It's somehow calming and pleasant. If you also found this episode calming and pleasant, perhaps you want to smash that like button to show me some love, or subscribe to see more episodes like this in the future. In any case, thanks for watching. I'm Jimzip. Bye!